The alarm buzzed at 4 a.m., and I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, already feeling the weight of the day ahead. The kitchen awaited me, a familiar battlefield of pots, cutting boards, and knives sharpened to precise edges. I moved with the muscle memory of decades, arranging vegetables by color and size, checking the roast in the fridge, calculating cooking times in my head. Every tray, every bowl, every spice had its place, as if the room itself understood the rhythm of my work. I chopped carrots and onions while recalling the mornings of Meredith's childhood, the endless school breakfasts, birthday cakes, and milestone dinners I had orchestrated with the same meticulous care. There was pride in it, yes, but also a lingering ache from the countless times my efforts had been taken for granted, brushed aside with a casual comment or a distracted glance. Meredith had her own life now, her own expectations, and sometimes it seemed she viewed my work as background noise rather than labor poured from the heart. By 6 at that the kitchen was alive with steam and the aroma of simmering herbs. The roast had been seasoned and was resting. The vegetables lined up in neat rows on the counter, and the desserts were chilling in their containers. I checked the list again. 43 guests, every dish accounted for, every timing calculated to the minute. The memory of past parties crept into my mind. The compliments that never came, the eyes that never lingered on my efforts. I shook it off, focusing on the present. Today was for Meredith, and the years of experience and love that had guided me this far were all I needed. There was no room for doubt, only the quiet satisfaction of preparing something with care, of honoring the family I had raised, even if my role often went unnoticed. I turned to the oven, slid the first tray in, and began whisking the hollandaise. Each motion steady and practiced. The day stretched ahead, full of work, precision, and anticipation. A delicate balance between devotion and self-erasure. And I moved through it with the calm determination that only decades of experience could give. Next, I focused on coordinating the timing for the stuffed mushrooms and twice-baked potatoes, knowing every minute would matter for the flow of the day. As I stirred the sauce, my mind drifted back through the years, tracing the path that had brought me here. Raising Meredith as a single mother had been a journey of constant calculation. How to stretch a paycheck, how to make a school lunch feel like love, how to turn every evening into a lesson in resilience. I remembered the nights I returned home from the library exhausted, yet still had to bake a birthday cake, iron a uniform, or sit through homework that seemed endless. Each task demanded attention, patience, and energy I didn't always feel I had. But giving less was never an option. There had been dreams I set aside a second degree in literature, travel to places I had longed to see, quiet afternoons spent reading without interruption. All of it was postponed, folded neatly into the margins of my life, because Meredith needed me, and the family required stability more than fulfillment. Sometimes I resented it, briefly, when the frustration of invisibility pressed on me, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself that this was love, the hard, unglamorous kind that showed itself in daily labor rather than praise. I paused to taste the hollandaise, adjusting the seasoning with the familiarity of years of practice, the memory of long afternoons teaching her to ride a bike, the countless dinners where I carried more than just food, hope, guidance, protection pressed gently against my chest. The effort was invisible, yes, but it was real, and it had shaped her into the woman she had become. And yet, that invisibility lingered, even now. There were moments when I caught Meredith's casual disregard, the way she assumed my work would appear, ready and perfect, without acknowledgement. Those subtle slights had accumulated quietly, a pattern I had learned to ignore for the sake of harmony, but one that had left its mark. I shook my head, bringing my focus back to the present. The anniversary party loomed, each dish a testament to years of devotion, patience, and sacrifice. I took a deep breath, measuring the weight of responsibility against the weight of love, knowing that every step of preparation was both an echo of the past and a choice I was making today. With the sauces prepped and the trays arranged, I moved toward the next phase of cooking, lining up the stuffed mushrooms and twice-baked potatoes for precise timing. By mid-morning, the kitchen was a whirlwind of motion. Leora moved from counter to stove with practiced efficiency, juggling multiple dishes, checking desserts, and timing the roast for 43 guests. The twice-baked potatoes sat cooling beside a tray of stuffed mushrooms, while the aroma of garlic and rosemary from the lamb mingled with the sweetness of chocolate mousse. Every detail had to be perfect. Every second mattered. Meredith called from the living room, casual and unconcerned. "Mom, I ordered some appetizers from that place downtown, just to make sure everyone has something to nibble before the main dishes." Leora paused, knife in hand, and stared at the small boxes of pre-made cheese and crackers. Her carefully planned menu, the dishes she had spent hours preparing, was being supplemented, almost as if her work was invisible, a mere backdrop. She forced herself to continue chopping, the sound of the knife sharp against the cutting board echoing her tightening chest. It wasn't the first time. She remembered other parties, other milestones, where her labor had been overshadowed or dismissed. She had poured herself into every meal, every celebration, with meticulous care, yet acknowledgement rarely followed. Her social security check had covered most of the ingredients, nearly leaving nothing for herself. Every penny spent, every hour endured, had been an investment in love that often felt unseen. The tension was subtle, but relentless, threading through the kitchen like steam from the boiling pots. Leora measured and portioned with precision, tasting, adjusting, correcting. Even as Meredith flitted past, distracted by her phone and her guest's arrival, Leora felt the familiar sting devotion met with casual indifference. She reminded herself of the purpose, the reason she did it. Meredith's happiness, the legacy of her care, the pride in the craft. Still, the quiet resentment simmered beneath the surface. By 11 the kitchen hummed with a rhythm that was both comforting and exhausting. Every dish aligned, ready for the guests who would soon arrive. Leora stepped back for a moment, surveyed her work, and took a deep breath. The morning was far from over, and she had no idea how the rest of the day would test both her patience and her resolve. Next, she turned her attention to coordinating the final timings for the lamb and desserts, knowing that Meredith's inattentiveness could unravel hours of meticulous planning. The dining room buzzed with conversation, laughter spilling from the living room as Meredith flitted between guests, collecting compliments with a practiced smile. I carried the final tray of lamb into the room, the aroma rich and comforting, a culmination of hours spent in preparation. I caught Meredith's eye and smiled, silently hoping for even a small acknowledgement of the work I had poured into every dish. Then, over the clinking of glasses and murmurs of appreciation for her decor, I heard it. Meredith's voice, loud, teasing, casual. "Well, if nobody wants seconds, we'll just feed it to the dogs." Laughter followed, light and carefree, as if she'd merely told a harmless joke, but every word landed like a stone, each one a reminder of how often my labor had been dismissed. I froze in the doorway, the tray held rigid in my hands. 43 plates of food, meticulously prepared, measured, and cooked, reduced to a punchline. My hands trembled slightly as the heat in my chest rose, a mix of shock, humiliation, and quiet fury. I felt the eyes of some guests on me, catching the tension I could not disguise, while others remained oblivious, carried away by the laughter. The room seemed to contract, the air thick with the weight of unspoken history, the countless times my devotion had been overlooked, my hours taken for granted, my skill and care invisible. My voice caught as I set the tray down with deliberate care, every movement slow, deliberate. The joke echoed in my mind, a sharp, stinging reminder that the person I had given so much to could reduce it all to nothing in a single sentence. For a moment, I simply stood there, measuring my options, the memory of early mornings, late nights, and silent sacrifices running through my thoughts. The anger simmered beneath the surface, hot and controlled, demanding acknowledgement. I realized that the way I reacted in the next few moments would define not just the rest of this day, but the value I would assign to myself going forward. I turned quietly toward the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, already forming the decision that would change the course of the afternoon. Next, I began methodically removing the food from the serving platters, my hands steady and precise, preparing to leave the room and reclaim control of the moment. I moved through the room with deliberate calm, lifting the first aluminum tray from the buffet table and sliding it onto the counter. My hands were steady, each motion practiced and controlled, though my mind churned with a mix of humiliation and resolve. Guests murmured in confusion as they realized what I was doing, their laughter fading into uneasy glances. Meredith froze mid-step, her smile faltering as she turned toward me, eyes wide with surprise. Without a word, I continued, transferring the roasted vegetables, the stuffed mushrooms, and the twice-baked potatoes into the trays I had brought for transport. Dessert followed the chocolate mousse and fruit tarts, carefully boxed, each one a symbol of hours of labor. Now leaving the room with me, the weight of the trays in my arms felt lighter than the burden I had carried in silence for decades. Meredith's voice came after me, tentative and sharp. "Mom, what are you doing?" I ignored it, my focus absolute. I moved past her, past the gathering of guests who had never truly seen the effort behind the food they were about to consume, and stepped toward the door. The air was thick with shock, a silence that had replaced the easy chatter and laughter. No one followed. No one offered to help. No one asked a question. Their hesitation was a quiet acknowledgement of the boundary I was finally enforcing. As I crossed the threshold, I felt a strange sense of liberation, an ownership of my own time, energy, and dignity. I carried the trays to the car, arranging them carefully on the back seat. The afternoon sun glinted off the aluminum lids, catching on the small droplets of condensation from the heat I had carried all morning. I closed the car door behind me, the house receding in the rearview mirror, and drove with a steady hand toward the next steps I had already begun to plan, my mind focused and resolute. Next, I turned my attention to where my skill could be recognized and valued, outside the confines of this dismissive family gathering. By mid-afternoon, I had navigated Portland traffic and pulled into the small parking lot behind Nathan Ford's catering kitchen. The urgency in his voice had been unmistakable over the phone. 2 line cooks out, the head chef sick, and a wedding for 80 guests scheduled to begin in less than 3 hours. I stepped inside carrying the trays of food from Meredith's party, the remnants of my labor now a lifeline for a situation that demanded precision and composure. Nathan met me at the door, panic written across his features. "Leora, thank God you're here. I don't know how we're going to pull this off." I nodded, setting the trays down on the prep table, already assessing the kitchen, the stations, the timing of each course. The line cooks glanced at me skeptically. Young and unfamiliar with someone my age taking command in the heat of last-minute chaos. I ignored their hesitation and began instructing them, calmly but firmly, breaking down the orders, checking temperatures, and coordinating plating with exacting care. I re-seasoned the lamb, fanned the roasted vegetables, and divided the desserts into individual portions, each adjustment made with practiced expertise. Every command was met with compliance, the staff gradually recognizing the authority behind my experience. Nathan lingered at the pass, eyes widening as he watched the transformation of a chaotic kitchen into a precise, functioning operation. The wedding guests began arriving, unaware that the meal they were about to enjoy had been saved by the very hands that had been dismissed at home. Orders moved smoothly, plates came together perfectly, and the line cooks followed my guidance with a mix of awe and relief. For the first time in decades, I felt my skill acknowledged without apology, without family pretense, simply valued. By the end of service, the kitchen hummed with satisfaction, the staff exhausted but impressed. Nathan clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes bright. "Leora, you saved this wedding. I don't know what we would have done without you." I allowed myself a small smile, the warmth of recognition filling a space that had long been empty. Next, I considered the possibility of new opportunities, realizing that my efforts could be appreciated and rewarded outside the confines of Meredith's dismissive expectations. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Katie Ford, the event coordinator who had overseen the wedding. She requested a meeting at her office downtown, a small, renovated warehouse with exposed brick and the faint scent of coffee. My hands were still sore from the previous day, but anticipation propelled me forward. As I walked through the polished floors and modern workspace, she greeted me with a firm handshake and a warm smile that carried genuine respect. "Katie," I said, "I wasn't sure what to expect after yesterday." She waved away my caution and spread papers across the table menus, photographs of past events, and projections for upcoming dinners. "Leora, the way you handled the wedding, your timing, your plating, your leadership, it was exceptional. I need someone like you for our donor appreciation dinners. If you can manage one, we'll discuss a more permanent role." I studied the papers, noting the scale of the events, the number of guests, the level of precision required. $500 budgets per table, multiple courses, and high-profile attendees. It was intimidating, but the confidence she placed in me was a revelation. For decades, my expertise had been invisible, overlooked, or dismissed within the walls of my own home. Here, it was not only recognized, it was valued. Katie's offer included a signing bonus and access to a fully equipped kitchen, an opportunity to demonstrate my full range of abilities. I felt a mixture of exhilaration and hesitation. Part of me wanted to rush back to familiar family obligations, to continue being the quiet provider, the invisible mother, but another part, the part that had been silent for years, recognized that this was my chance to finally step into the role I had earned. As I left the office with the papers in hand, the weight of possibility pressed against me. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in decades, I felt the stirrings of empowerment and choice, the knowledge that my skills could lead to recognition and independence beyond the constraints of Meredith's expectations. Next, I had to decide how far I was willing to go in pursuing this new direction, knowing it would redefine my life entirely. By the end of the week, I had made my decision. I would accept Katie Ford's offer, not as a favor or a temporary distraction, but as the beginning of a path that belonged entirely to me. I called Meredith first, choosing my words with care and resolve. "I've been offered a professional opportunity," I said. "It will take up much of my time, and I won't be able to handle additional family events on the same schedule. I hope you understand." There was a pause on the other end. A flicker of surprise I could almost hear through the phone. Meredith's voice was hesitant, polite but tinged with frustration. "Are you sure this is necessary? I thought you'd help with the upcoming gatherings as usual." I remained calm. I've spent decades making myself available, often at the expense of my own life and goals. This is something I've earned for myself. I'll help when I can, but the boundaries are firm. The relief I felt after hanging up was immediate. The weight of unacknowledged labor and invisible service began to lift, replaced by clarity and focus. I spent the next hours drawing up plans for the first donor dinner, organizing menus, ingredient lists, and staff assignments. Each decision reinforced my autonomy. Each adjustment, a small assertion of control that had long been absent from my daily life. As I packed equipment and checked schedules, I realized the freedom inherent in choice. I could craft a career that demanded respect, recognition, and accountability from others, rather than silently giving myself to expectations that were never reciprocated. I felt the surge of confidence that came from acting deliberately, for myself, and not for validation from family who had too often dismissed me. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in years, it felt entirely mine to shape. Next, I would face the family's reaction to my new priorities, knowing that asserting my independence would test both their assumptions and my own resolve. A few days after accepting Katie Ford's offer, my phone rang. Meredith's name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated only briefly before answering. "Leora," she said, voice tight but cautious. I wanted to apologize for the other day, for the party, for how things were handled." I listened quietly, letting her words fill the space between us. The usual guilt trip, the subtle expectation that I would smooth everything over, was absent. Instead, there was an attempt at acknowledgement, a recognition of missteps. I kept my tone calm and measured. "I appreciate the apology," I said. "I've decided to focus on some professional work. My schedule will be different now. I'll help when I can, but I need you to respect that." Meredith swallowed audibly. I understand. Her voice trailed off. There was a pause, and I could sense the surprise in her hesitation. She hadn't expected me to assert myself so firmly, to maintain boundaries without wavering. Later, my brother and his wife called as well, offering conciliatory words and thinly veiled concern about my new priorities. I thanked them politely, keeping the conversation brief and precise. There was no argument, no attempt to guilt me into old patterns. For the first time, I realized that the shift in my behavior, the confidence and clarity in asserting my own needs, was altering the family dynamic. As I hung up the last call, a quiet sense of empowerment settled over me. The relationships I had long allowed to dictate my time and energy were no longer controlling me. I was not rejecting them out of anger, but I was no longer willing to sacrifice my autonomy to maintain appearances or placate expectations. The realization was both liberating and definitive. My family could apologize. They could attempt reconciliation, but they could not reclaim the control they had once taken for granted. Next, I would step fully into the world of professional recognition, testing my skills and independence in ways that had long been denied. 6 months later, I stood in a bustling kitchen that was entirely mine, coordinating staff for a charity gala at a downtown Portland venue. Each station ran smoothly under my guidance, from the line cooks handling appetizers to the pastry team arranging desserts with precision. Clients approached, complimenting the quality of the service and the presentation of the food, and for the first time, I felt that my skills were recognized on their own merit. I reflected on the years I had devoted to family obligations, the countless meals prepared in silence, and the subtle disregard I had endured. Setting boundaries had not been easy, and stepping into this new professional life required courage I had long kept hidden. Yet the satisfaction of directing a kitchen, seeing the results of my expertise appreciated, and earning respect without apology affirmed that I had finally reclaimed a part of myself that had been dormant for decades. The applause of guests, the grateful nods from clients, and the smooth flow of the evening all reminded me that dignity and purpose could exist outside the constraints of family expectations. I had not sought revenge. I had created something of my own, a life where my worth was measured not by service to others, but by my own vision and effort. As the last plates were cleared and the kitchen quieted, I felt the permanence of this change, the opening of a future entirely shaped by my choices and the life I had finally claimed for myself.